Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ICAEW lecture series. Okay, so last week we had Mr. Ong. All right, who actually introduced to us the syllabus for the audit assurance. Today we have Mr. Simon, who is our tax specialist. Right, and we are going to be going through some papers that he's actually teaching at this point in time. So let me introduce to you the papers that he's teaching. As we have said last week, all right, the papers that we have in our syllabus is divided into 3 levels. We have the certificate level, professional level, and the advanced level. So Simon is teaching the principles of taxation at the certificate level, as well as the professional level, tax compliance, and also business planning taxation. All right. So Simon has been in Sunway TES for the past 20 odd years, right? Started in 1999. Okay. And of course, he started teaching the ICAEW program in 2004. And his achievements include 6 ICAEW World Prize winners and numerous, right, groups achieving 100% passes. So let's welcome Mr. Simon.
Hi, gentlemen or ladies. Good evening.
Hi, Simon.
It's good to join. How's everybody? All right. It's good to be on the show. It feels like a late night show.
Yes, it's quite late actually, 9:05.
Yeah. So, but I guess Malaysians are very used to all these late night events and so on, going out for a drink and having a good meal or supper even perhaps. Okay.
Yep. Right. So
but not now.
Not now lah. Okay. Otherwise we kena saman lah.
Yeah.
All right, Simon, would you like to share with us your journey with Sunway TES? Beginning from your 1999 days all the way up to now getting so many world prizes.
Well, it's been a long journey. Well, it started when I joined Sunway TES back in 1999 after having completed my professional qualification locally. All right. Okay. Now, back then, if you actually look back, right, ICAEW was very much more prestigious in the sense that only those students who actually doing the degree in the UK actually offered this program in the UK. So only in the early 2000s when ICAEW started, venturing out into the Asian Pacific, were we able to, grab this prestigious chance of, collaborating with ICAEW, bringing in many more students to this world on ICAEW. So back then, having completed my Form 6, there wasn't much jobs available because of the 1997, the Asian financial crisis. So I took up my professional studies in the local university, local colleges, and so on. I completed that within about 2.5 years. Then I went on to become a tutor for one of these local institution. All right, and then having developed that teaching skill and my joy in doing that, I got a call from Mr. Teo, the Sunway TES executive director. So I then moved on to Sunway back in 1999. And then from there, I started teaching, the basic Malaysian taxation from the CAT level first. And then moving on as Sunway started opening up the ICAEW program, which then they launched the CFAP. I got a chance to teach the UK taxation. So then I moved on from there. All right. So throughout those years, I have been teaching both the Malaysian and UK tax. So I would say both the Malaysian and UK tax are fairly familiar to me. And with many of this that we have learned or currently adopting in Malaysia, are actually an adaptation, modification from the UK taxation system, just like the formerly known as the GST that we had previously. All right. So it's actually a VAT system, but of course we have our own variation. Yeah. So that was how it began and until today. All right. And I enjoy teaching.
And your students love you, right? All right. Okay, so last week we had a session with Mr. Ong, and we discussed about specific skills that the ICAEW actually trains our students. All right, and I believe that all these skills, right, actually cuts through from the certificate level to the professional level and all the way up to the advanced level. So we mentioned about things like the assimilation of information, structuring problems and solutions, applying judgment, and making conclusions and recommendations, as well as the communication skills. All right. Perhaps Simon, you could actually tell us from your lower level papers, right, which is the principle of taxation, all the way up to tax compliance and tax planning, how the students are actually develop these skills from one paper to the next.
Okay, so, great. Now, for those students who join us from the CFAP level, of course, their first text paper will be the principle of taxation. This is where the students are, taught on the general objective of the taxation aspect, where they are then exposed to the different 5 UK tax components, namely 4 direct taxes, the income tax, NIC, corporation tax, and even the CGT. So the indirect one that is being briefly introduced to them would be the VAT, the value added tax component. So the students are required to also recognize those ethical issues arising in the course of performing their work. They are just required to do a very basic income tax, CGT computation, and even corporation tax computation at this level. So this level is fairly brief introduction of the UK taxation. Unfortunately, as you are aware, taxation is not like other papers, it changes every year. So the challenges are that the students are required to be well versed with the current financial act, okay, and the rates, etc. Then as they move on to the tax compliance paper, now the tax compliance paper is slightly a little bit more challenging in the sense that the students are now required to compute a full tax computation, where they are required to understand that the various tax implication, okay, and their course of action, and then they are required to explain the potential tax treatment of certain transactions. At the same time, how some of the action undertaken by the taxpayers or their client can affect their tax implication, particularly leading to tax savings in the legal manner. Okay, so those are the issues that students will need to take note, including, of course, they already been exposed to the basic tax compliance obligation at the lower level. So at this level, they will need to ensure that, if the clients do not submit their tax return on time or pay their tax on time, what will be the implications? They should be able to highlight, demonstrate their understanding, and be able to compute this penalty or interest where necessary. And then once they move on to even higher level, the BPT level, this is the most challenging paper, simply because they are now required to apply the technical knowledge to which they have learned at the tax compliance level, basically the various reliefs that is available. And they need to then apply their professional skills in identifying, resolving these technical taxation issues arising in the context of preparing tax computation and to advise the tax efficient strategy undertaken by the client. Okay, they are also need to use this technical knowledge and professional judgment to identify, explain, evaluate the tax treatment, and to determine whether the appropriate solutions to taxation issues, giving consideration to the needs of the client, as well as the interaction with the various taxes. The problem with business planning taxation is that it is a very integrated tax, and none of this tax stand alone. So students at this stage will need to be able to see the link between the various taxes, which they have already learned very extensively at the tax compliance level. Thus, it is actually a very interesting chapter simply because it also involves the overseas aspect, where students are now required to deal with how all foreign income or foreign gains are being dealt with in UK. All right. So it's a very challenging paper. So I would say students learning this tax would be able to easily pick it up, points if they're able to identify the issues in the exam questions and scoring it easily. Yeah,
that's basically the key thing about what we mentioned, assimilation of information, isn't it? So it's like they have to read the case, and then from there on pick out the right information, okay, and then structure it into whichever tax framework that you need to be putting in. Like for example, if it's corporate tax, right? So how you can actually frame it up. So it's all about how you actually pick up the information, and then from there on structuring it, and then to see how you can actually plan to solve the problem of reducing the amount of tax that you pay.
Legally, of course.
Yeah, legally. Okay. So constantly the students will have to make conclusions as well as being able to make recommendations, isn't it, for this kind of paper? What kind of
student stage, especially at the business planning taxation, they are required to offer the various options available to taxpayers, and which are among those options are the best, taking into account the context of the taxpayer's current financial position, because some tax option may lead to an immediate tax liability, which at the moment may not be in the best interest of the taxpayer. So some of the taxpayer may choose to defer to pay tax, all right, although it is at a higher rate in the future, all right, but they may choose to defer this, all right, given their current financial position.
Yeah, you actually brought up a very important point where I realized that all our exam papers, right, no matter how the students are prepared in terms of the technical skills, there will always be some surprise in there that is going to help them to think on their feet on the day of the examination. So it's like, being able to be aware of the context of the case, being immersed into that particular situation where they have to really have a good understanding of all the stakeholders, be able to manage the stakeholders. Those are the key things that the qualification actually trains our students to be. Like for example, a lot of the cases that my students do, right, is always going to be different. Okay, and it is not about them knowledge dumping. Okay,
Nope.
because if they were to knowledge dump, it's definitely not going to be able to handle the paper.
Not the idea, not the way, man.
Yeah.
In fact, Jack brought up a very, very good idea on the sense that the way that they test in ICAEW is quite different from other professional examination, in the sense that there have been many situations where students are being tested in a manner that it requires them to think logically from the taxpayer's perspective. I'll give you an example. Okay, let's say these taxpayers wanted to actually settle down in UK, having fell in love with UK and having worked in UK. He decided to buy a house in the UK. But of course, buying a house in UK is a very big decision. It's an expensive decision. So he has prepared to make a number of disposals of some of his personal belongings, where some of these personal belongings will then attract the CGT, the capital gains tax. So the question here asks the students to determine the amount of loan that the taxpayer will need in order to meet his goal of being able to buy his desired property in UK. So the students will need to now, number one, compute a gain based on all those chargeable assets being disposed of in the UK. The good news is some of these assets are, of course, an exempt asset, which means they're exempt from CGT, which means they can completely receive the proceed 100%. All right. The rest, however, the gain are subject to CGT, which means the students will need to make a provision for those tax, taking into account the rates appropriately applied to the different type of gain in the UK. And then having taken into consideration those tax and the proceeds, they have to look at the net amount that they receive compared with the tax, the amount that they need to buy the property in hand. So the difference would be, of course, the loan that they will need to obtain it from the bank, taking into account that, of course, buying a home in UK is also, loaded with another tax that is called a stamp duty land tax. So that means besides buying the home, there's another tax element. So does the student take this out when they, do this question? So it's not so straightforward as, okay, this is the asset being disposed of, compute again. Not exactly, because now they're turning the question a little bit in the sense that the students are given a scenario where these taxpayers, your client, intend to buy a home, where you now need to do it the other way around, from the objective of buying a home to comparing it with the proceed received after tax, and the difference will be measured in terms of the loan that they need to obtain. So it's a very interesting paper, different thinking requirement. So it's more of like a problem solving, something that we usually, emphasize in class all the time. Yeah.
So can you imagine the fact that they constantly are being trained on problem solving? I always tell my students, that when you go for an exam, it's like going through an IQ test. Every time you go into the exam is to see how fast you change, how agile you are, how are you able to actually adapt to the situation. It's like you are teaching them how to swim, all right, very basic strokes. Okay, and then on the day of the exam, a tsunami may come, all right, or they may be jumping into deep blue sea. So we would not know what is the thing that they're going to be facing. All right, so this is where the beauty of this particular program, the agility of a way that we train our students. All right, because as you can see, you tell me that every single year, right, your tax rates change, isn't it? But the way that you solve the problem is the same, right? The way that you're going to be looking at things will be the same. So you just have to interpret the standards differently. You see how it's going to be applied differently. And then from there on, you just have to come up with a solution. Now, this year, this is how it's going to happen. So how are we going to solve this problem? Okay, and every individual's context is different, right? So you may be going to UK as a millionaire. You'll be going to UK as a graduate student, all right? So the tax implications will all be different, isn't it? So it's all about them being able to solve problems. And that's the reason why I think our students are so easily being grabbed by people, because it's their ability to think on their feet. That's the key, not just memorizing the textbook, right? To the extent that even that your BBT, right, they are allowed to even bring in a textbook, isn't it?
Yep. It's an open text exam.
It's open book exam. It's an open exam, but it's just a matter of they appreciate that all these tax rates do change and all these systems do change. So what's the point of you memorizing it now? All right, and you do not remember how to use your brain. All right, instead of just memorizing the things, you should be using your brain on how to solve the problem. Okay, the higher level papers that require you to use higher order thinking, you are required to really think and not just only regurgitate. Because a lot of programs, they will just basically focus on memorizing, and at the end of the day, they are not able to solve problems because they're so occupied with the amount of things that they memorize, they forgot that actually they have to think to solve problems, isn't it?
In fact, the paper teaches the students to be adaptable and flexible given the changing scenario that we always encounter in tax. Because in tax world, things can change. Like for example, the company now intend to dispose of the shares of its one of its subsidiaries where it got its offer, but this offer only is for the next 6 months at a particular price. Should this offer be not taken up at these 6 months, if the shares are then disposed of at a later date, probably the buyer is only probably willing to say buy it at a lower price. The question is, okay, you need to then look into the company's corporate profile to see whether does it make sense to sell now if you can take advantage of the tax, all right, exemptions. Like for example, what we call the substantial shareholding exemption, where the vendor company must have held these shares for at least a continuous period of 12 months in the previous 6 years, where they have held this at least 10% shareholding. So if these conditions are met, then they could sell these shares free from any corporation tax liability. This exemption also allows for partial disposal of the shares, thus allowing the flexibility for the company to dispose part of the shareholding and then unloading the balance when the conditions are still met in order to avoid a charge to what they call corporation tax. So this is very interesting in the sense that students need to think it, okay, look, if I sell now, this is the amount that I get and it's tax-free. But if I sell later, I may not meet the condition, which means the company will have to end up paying corporate tax on the disposal of the share, leaving the shareholder with less proceed. Right? That may not be a good idea. So this requires the student to think and explain to the examiners the outcome of the taxpayer's decided decision, okay, or desired result, okay, or the intended disposal.
Correct. I think especially when you tell me things like, so technical areas, right? When we talk about the higher level papers like the SBM and the CR, you see how they actually integrate things like, financial reporting and audit into one paper. And then later they put in the business strategy and technology together with financial management. And then all that is being integrated. And then later these 4 papers, these particular 4 core professional papers are being integrated further to case study. Just like what you're telling me now just now, right? It's about, you're talking about tax perspective, but you also brought in things like, the shareholders' interest, right? The kind of dividends that they have to think about. So you are really, being trained to slowly integrate the technical ability of your financial accounting, your management accounting, your tax knowledge, right, and the ability to use the technology and to strategize for the company, right, advising the board of directors what you should be doing. So that's, I guess, what is the interesting thing about our qualification is how they integrate the technical areas and still, of course, base it very fundamentally on the thinking skills of what are you able to assimilate information? Are you able to structure problem solutions? Are you able to provide conclusions, recommendations, and very importantly, apply judgment? Okay, and of course, the communication skills are so important. So we can see that all across all our qualification papers, that's the fundamental skill that they actually built. Whether you're doing tax or whether you're doing assurance, whether you're doing management accounting, or whether you're doing finance or whatever that is in the corporate world, all right, you will need to use these skills of problem solving. So essentially, when we talk about all those, how you look at information, integrate the financial and the non-financial, the qualitative information that we have. Like for example, in the context that you have brought up about one individual moving to UK, all right, we have to look at the financial standing. All right, we have to look into their own personal interests. We have to look into what kind of family members they're bringing across. Right, and then only you could actually advise them on what are things that we can actually do to help this individual. So that's assimilation of information. And looking at all the technical areas that we have is structure it in the way that we're going to see this is your problem and this is your solution. And we have to give professional judgment to tell them, this is what you should or should not do. And that's where we will conclude and recommend to them what to do. All right, so that's the key. So definitely, I think this also echoes what our the head of ICAEW, Ms. Loy Wagan, as well as the Engineer Nick Sharizal, that actually during the session with him, the partner from PwC, they mentioned about several key skills, right, that future professionals need to have, which is adaptability. We mentioned that just now. All right, insight, the ability to analyze, just like how you analyze for me, what an individual needs to bring in, all right, and the ability to solve problems, and the ability to manage technology. And I'm sure our students will be able to learn how to manage things like blockchains, artificial intelligence, and all that. And most importantly, stakeholder management. All right. And all the things that you mentioned to me, we have to have the empathy for the stakeholders first before we could actually understand their scenario. If you can't even communicate and have an understanding of what our stakeholders actually want, whether your shareholders are the most important that we have to take care of, or do we want to make sure that we have enough money that's reserved for our employees, right, in our development, okay, and whether do we want to keep the money for retain our earnings for capital investments, all right. So we have to think about how are we going to have an understanding between all these departments, have empathy for all the stakeholders as an organization. That's one of those. All these are the skills, right, that the qualification actually trains, right? So definitely, I think they are definitely very transferable, all right? And of course, do you have any examples for us about how, based on, these things that we train our students, is it really transferable in the real world that you have experienced before?
Yes, of course, because tax being a very technical paper, all right, students who have acquired these skills will not only need to be required to be very accurate and careful with the numbers, but moving forward, they will need to think clearly of the options available to the taxpayer and which of these options could lead to the better outcome for the taxpayers on an overall basis. Looking at their financial position, like I mentioned earlier on, that is very important. Although you may want to come up with a particular tax option, but sometimes that may lead to an immediate income tax liability or VAT liability. That's something that the taxpayer may not want to incur at the moment. So moving forward, students need to look at the options and clearly which would be favorable to the taxpayers given their different personality, all right, age group. Because of course, for youngsters, of course, at the moment they may be keen to start climbing the corporate ladder. Of course, all right, we will not need to start to think about their income tax, which we will continue raising. They will need to then, of course, start putting this money into capital assets that would then generate gains, which would then be taxed at a lower rate, rather than putting this money in a bank, which is then being taxed at the income tax minimum at 20% in UK. So thus, moving forward as the students grow and obtain further qualification, get promoted, they get manager level. Once they're in the middle age group, they may want to start thinking about settling down, buying a properties, start saving for their retirement. So different tax requirements for different age. And you may be even encountering a taxpayer who's about to retire, okay? So if you encounter a taxpayer who's about to retire, you're not going to tell him, hey, look, you need to start saving, start to contribute pension, and you get this tax incentive. He'll tell you, hey, look, young man, I'm about to retire. I want to take my time. And then those money that I've saved, I'm going to sail around the world for half a year. You know what I mean? So they may have accumulated all this. So the last thing they want would be to have an income which is then taxed, whereas they have saved enough for their future needs for their retirement. So I think tax needs to be adaptive to different taxpayers' scenario, and that is very important. That's why the students undertaking this program, particularly for the tax papers, they will get to see this across the spectrum. All right, whether you're an individual, self-employed, okay, whether you are a boss yourself, all right, how you can provide this benefit to your employee and retain them, all right, by offering them pension scheme, and what are the incentives that you get by contributing to this pension scheme for the employer. Those are very important.
Simon, when you're just talking, right, it just reminded me that sitting in your class, where we actually give students one very important skill, which is foresight. Foresight. Definitely. And also financial literacy. Okay, being able to understand tax, right, is like really knowing, in the future, what's your retirement plan is going to be. All right. So this is something very important that, a lot of the in the business world, right, even in the community, right, there is so much need for financial literacy. Okay, and by sitting papers that you have actually introduced to the students, they actually have that kind of foresight to think about, hey, what's my family going to be like? All right, how am I going to be able to provide for them, and how are they going to be able to think about their retirement plans? All right, so it's all within that. Even I'm sure you would notice that when they pass away, they will still have to pay inheritance tax, right?
Inheritance tax, yeah. The death tax in the UK, but not in Malaysia, luckily.
Not in Malaysia. So you're going to someone that's going to overseas in UK, right? Because you're teaching a UK tax, all right? If they're settling there, inheritance tax is also there, right? So you have to plan for your kids as well if you want to do give them something.
But of course, over the years, with the Brexit being thrown in, all right, a lot of incentives have been, dished out to try to retain as many British in Britain, all right, because many of them are not satisfied with the Brexit issue. They have decided to migrate to EU. Thus, as an incentive for them to retain back in the UK, the UK government have offered many of the new incentive tax exemptions, new reliefs. All right, in fact, there's an increase in the relief on a year-by-year basis, just to let you know.
Right.
So these are all effort by the government to ensure that the community is sustained and not, having a rash decision of selling or unloading this property into the market, thus causing the economy to either stagnant or suffer a depression at this difficult time. So those methods undertaken by the government in the UK are also reflected in the Tax Act itself. And students doing this particular paper needs to be, all right, frequently updated with the challenges, okay, as just like what we do in a real life corporate world. So, like for example, before the pandemic, we've been happily teaching in class, using textbook, etc. But once the pandemic come in, all right, we have to start slowly adapting to the use of online classes, all right, being, independent, I guess.
Yep. Independence. We will know when the results are out whether they're really independent or not.
No, of course.
That's going to be interesting. Okay. So, from your perspective, we're talking about tax rates in different countries, right? So you can see how they also learn how to think about from a very macro level, talking about how countries can become more competitive by managing their taxes, their fiscal policies, all right, and how they actually, attract more investors going into the countries, right? So they also can see it from a very macro level, okay, which is, the things that they will be able to see in the global world. All right. So I think from the technical point, I think students will probably have a very good idea when they really go into your classes. Maybe we can take some questions from the group and see, what kind of questions they will have relating to your paper and maybe my paper, which I teach business strategy. Okay. Any questions from the floor that you can take?
Remember, there are two things in life that is certain: death and tax.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why I brought in the inheritance tax.
Yeah, of course. All right. But knowing tax is going to be there, what is important is for each and every one of us to start learning about tax, protecting ourselves against the tax officers, okay? Because otherwise, failure to comply would lead to penalties and even interest in the UK. And even in Malaysia, failure to submit the return could lead to a fine of not less than 2,000 ringgit for each year for failure to submit the return. So that can put a dent in your saving. And that's the last thing that you want. So I always emphasize to students that, it is important that you look at or take note of the due date, advise the client by when do they need to submit the return, by when they need to make the claim for certain election for the relief to be effective, okay? Or even if you wish to claim certain exemption, by when do they need to make those election or the due date? Okay.
Teaching them how to be professional, teaching them how to manage deadlines, all those are important. Okay.
Just like when you have so many financial products out in the market, so you have to look at it, whether is it suitable for your own personal circumstances. And then if you do take up a particular financial product, are there any tax relief? Like say, for example, if I do contribute to a personal pension scheme in the UK, similar to Malaysia, we call it the private retirement scheme. What are my incentives? So these are to help me to start saving for my future. The question is, if I do save now, all right, what do I get from the government? Well, in the form of tax saving, all right, but in the form of relief, whereas in UK, it is an extension of the ban, thus saving, all right, the 20% tax for those higher rate taxpayers. So the students who have done this could probably have learned it. They know what I'm talking about, those who are attending my class. Okay.
So, Simon, since you have gotten so many world prizes and so many 100% passes, right? Any advice to the students on how they could actually, study to become successful chartered accountants, or just
Three
study
words.
tips?
Three words. Practice, practice, practice. Okay. Yes. I think the main thing is, of course, once you understand the text, the logic behind it, okay, then it becomes fun, not just rather learning it remotely that, okay, this is the rates, these are rules, but there must be a reason, all right, reasoning behind it, why the government imposed in such manner, right now. So therefore, it is important for students to appreciate this text, not just from a study perspective, so that they actually get to see how it actually works in reality and why does it help the businesses. Like, for example, I'll give you a very, very simple example. In UK, we have what we call the gift relief that allow the generation from one generation to pass these assets, whether it's businesses, shares of unquoted company, to the next generation, so that this can be passed on without being imposed a tax charge at the CGT level. Because if there is a tax charge, all right, every time when there's a gift of such business asset among the family members, they may have to end up selling part of this asset, leading to the younger generation with no business asset left. So therefore, this allows the businesses to be passed from one generation to another generation in a form of, all right, by deferring the gain in a form we call gift relief, so that it allows the next generation to continue carry on the business, whether it's a wine business, bakery business, without having to bear the tax as far as the transfer of asset from one generation to another generation. So this is what we call the gift relief, which unfortunately we in Malaysia, we have at the moment do not have such comprehensive tax act yet. Okay.
Okay. So I think, like you say, practice until you're as expert as Mr. Simon, you will be fine. Okay, that's the key. I think, like as I said just now, we are training our students on how to have real life skills, all right, like swimming, for example. You cannot be watching a YouTube video on how to swim. You cannot be reading a textbook on how to swim. You really have to swim. Otherwise, how would you know how to swim? Simple as that.
You have to get yourself into that situation here.
Yes, you have to get wet. You have to get wet. As simple as that. All right. So I think that's a question from the floor.
Any further questions?
Okay. Tan?
Thanks, Tan. That's a very logical, rational question for anybody intending to do ICAEW program. Just like any other paper, tax can never be easy, simply because of the ever-changing environment in which we are adapted to in a year-by-year basis. But fear not, simply because with good, all right, lecturers and course management, including the internal exam being put in place to assess your understanding, your preparation, okay, this will then help you to gain better understanding as you move along in this career path, as in all your papers, from the CFAP to the professional level, and then eventually to advanced stage. Okay, rest assured that we at Sunway, we do our part, we do our best to ensure that students get the best out of this paper, to ensure that they get a better chance when they actually sit for the final exam. They are really more or less prepared. Although tax is not a very difficult subject, it's a technical subject that students should not learn it in a very remote manner, okay, or just memorizing the numbers only. That would not be helpful. All right, not in the long term at least. Okay, so you may pass in the lower level, but once you go up to a higher level where you should require problem solving skill, thinking skill, all right, then it might be a big challenge for those students who basically learn it, like a parrot. So you need to have a good understanding. Once you have a good understanding, believe me, all right, looking at the question, you'll probably be laughing. Can they ask me a tougher question? Because this is just a piece of cake. All right, because I'll probably finish it before the time, and then I'll probably have a time for coffee or tea.
Yeah, if you go through Mr. Simon's classes, you will have enough practice to be able to handle anything, no problem at all.
Normally, what I do is I usually show two methods to my students in the class. Okay. That's the long road, and there's a shortcut. Okay, but I will never show them the shortcut unless I bring them through the long road first. And having gone through that method, then they see the rationale, the simplification of the shortcut, which can cut half their time of doing the same thing, which then help them to move on to the next paper with ease. Okay, but of course, this should only be done after they have understood the rationale behind doing the long road. Okay, that's the way.
Yeah, don't take shortcuts, but
shortcut is important.
You have to take shortcut, but you need to make sure that you learn it the hard way first.
You're correct. That way, it stays with you. It stays with you. Believe me.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, then you will appreciate the shortcut even better.
All right. Then you say, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. How come I haven't thought of that? Isn't it? Right. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Some students will get that. Oh, yeah. That light bulb. Heating, okay, or lighting up. Done. Thank you.
So, any other questions? Do we have any more from the floor?
Tax is actually a well-building mechanism actually at the moment.
Okay, so
if you want to build you need to master tax.
Before we actually, everyone have to do that tax, right, when they go out to work.
Yeah, of course.
So it's a matter of how do you do it. The next question I want to ask is before we go, okay. Oh, one more new one just appeared. Let's have a look at it. What question was that? Since tax changes every year, does the study manual change according to the year, or it stays the same? Sorry, still new to all this, no problem.
Yeah, of course. Now, for ICAEW, what ICAEW does is that this Finance Act is reflected in the study manual, and this study manual is effective for the whole calendar year in Malaysia. So if you're doing a particular exam, say from January to December this year, it will be by reference to the Finance Act 2019. So we will be following all that tax act strictly within the manual, and only those things within the manual will be examined in the real final examination, not anything new. So if there's anything new, they will then probably put it in the next year's examination, but not for this year. So I would recommend the students to pass tax every year and not having been stranded in one year, having to go through this tax paper again the very next year. Because by then, like I always warn my December students, if you fail in December, unfortunately, there will be a lot of new things coming in, and you might need to study all over again, okay, because of the changes in tax rate that will affect a number of other tax implications as well. So thus, it is important that students pass regularly at each sitting, all right? And then if they do so, they'll be having a much more smooth and comfortable life, believe me. Although I change, I change numbers every year, but once you get used to it, it's not a big deal. Thanks,
Actually, it's not just only textbooks will change, even the theory textbooks. All right, like for example, the business, finance, and technology that I teach, as well as the business strategy and technology. So you will assume that it's going to be a very what we call a static kind of materials, right? Nothing much changes. But you should also understand that there are lots of technologies that are being introduced in the industry. All right, you bring in AI, you bring in artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotic process automation, and all those things, right? So every year we will update. Okay, every year we will update to include all these technologies, and if there are new ones, all right, like for example new standards, all right, we will also put it in. Okay, so every year we will have a new set of manuals. Of course, our implication will not be as strong as yours, whereby you really have to make sure that there's a motivation to pass it within the year, because we do have a lot of carry forward materials. Okay, that's a good question.
That's a very good question. Very, very valid question.
Yep.
Okay.
So maybe, Mr. Simon, you can tell us about your own. Do you have any personal motto of your success stories?
Well, I would say, fine-tuning everything that you do in your life will make your goal shorter, closer and faster and shorter to the goal. Okay, you have to keep on upgrading. All right, doing it better. Okay, if I have done this question within half an hour, can I do it better without making mistakes within the same or lesser time? As you keep on doing better at this, okay, you will find that, this then starts to affect your habit of making yourself a better person and how you could have done and achieved in a much more economical, efficient manner. All right. So I think every one of us have to go through that, okay? And this pandemic has actually brought some of the best features among a human being. Like, for example, you can see a frontliner working very, very hard. Even the police officers are, amending all this road to ensure those SOP are being adhered to. At whose expense? Taxpayers' expense. You and I, we are the taxpayers who paid for all this, isn't it? So you have to be happy that they are doing a fantastic job out of our tax that we have paid over the years, that you and I always rarely say that, where does my tax money goes to? They are doing it now. All right, by ensuring that every one of us keeping ourselves safe, okay? All right, running the hospital, taking care of the patients or those who have been diagnosed with, COVID, say, for example, all right, ensuring that, they are well fed, being well within that 14-day quarantine period. This is where our tax money come from. So I would say, I can tell you the truth. All right, folks. This pandemic actually clearly highlight where our taxpayers' money really goes into good use to ensure that
really good use. Otherwise, you wouldn't be ranked one of the best healthcare centers. Yeah, great,
fantastic.
So good. Fine-tuning. All right, reflect.
Keep on fine-tuning. Yes, fine-tuning.
Keep on fine-tuning, learning from your own mistakes, improving from there. I think that's a very important thing that we must always do. All right. So I think if there's no more questions, I think that's all for today.
Is that all? I was expecting more questions. I was expecting more questions. Hey, I don't go to bed that early. My supper time is coming up.
I think after a while, right, they might text you directly, Mr. Simon, and ask you questions directly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably. Most probably.
In that case, I think with that, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your attention. Okay, thank you, Jack.
No problem.
Thanks.
All right, see you again.
All right, it's been a
thank
pleasure.
You very much. Bye.
All right, please take care of yourself. Please stay safe. Stay safe.